Hello, founders. Welcome to Startups.com. We are live. We have an amazing show planned for you today. As always, I'm joined by Q and Jen, part of the team here at Startups.com. My name is Ed, the Chief Strategy Officer for Startups.com. Excited to have everybody joining us. Thank you for everybody who's joining us in the audience, as well as those who will be watching us in the future. You can join us. We do this every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at the same time. I want to just highlight super quick one of our sponsors. Not really, it's us. And I want to point out that we have an amazing podcast called Startup Therapy, hosted by Ryan Rattan and Will Schroeder. Will Schroeder is our CEO. Ryan Rattan is our CMO. And this is a podcast where they take a no-holds-barred look at all the stuff that founders don't talk about, all the soft stuff that gets super hard, expectations, what it's like, and they just talk and they get super real about all the things that, again, founders need to hear but don't necessarily talk about, or we don't talk about in these forums. For example, looking at the latest episode, Is My Ambition My Enemy? I was having a chat with Will the other day, and I think he did this podcast just about me because this is exactly what we were talking about how we push ourselves as founders. I highly encourage everybody who is going to be watching this, who's with us right now, check out the Startup Therapy podcast. It is a great time. With that being said, what we also like to do is invite guest speakers up to our panel, and we bring them up and we just want to get to know them. And we're going to have a series of guests. It's going to be fantastic. We've got a great slate of guests that are going to be joining us through the next few weeks and more to come. So if you're interested in joining us or you're interested in seeing a particular guest, let us know. We have with us, jumping in, Tony the Toiga Teshara, as I affectionately refer to him. Tony, thanks for making it. We're diving right in. We just got going. How about you introduce yourself and share with us who you are, what you do, what's your startup all about?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. So I work in the HR and recruitment space. I've been a serial founder for the last couple of years now. I've exited out of one. I've been funded by a few. Prior to that, I've worked in basically SaaS software my entire life. And these days, really what I'm doing is I help a lot of early stage startup founders, blossoming companies find those first technical hires that kind of are really mission critical to start up their businesses. So I spend a lot of my days kind of working with founders, CTOs, CEOs, and really trying to understand and dive into, hey, what are you trying to accomplish in the next, I would usually say like 12 to 18 months, but these days it's really 3 to 6 months, right? Because we got a really kind of micro runway. And so we really try to focus on the short-term goals and how those fit into long-term goals. And so we derive strategies that allow them to be successful in growing their business without burning through too much capital.
Tony is one of our community advisors. He's a stalwart on our community. We've been collaborating together. What I love about Tony is that he is a founder's founder. He has been around. Tony, you've worked with AI. You have done SaaS platforms. You've been all over the map. Just give everybody a thumbnail sketch. How many startups have you actually been a part of? You've raised money as well. Give us a thumbnail of your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So currently I am starting up my fourth startup, right? Some of them been successful and we exited out. Some not so much, where I realized the hard way that, hey, maybe we're a little early or maybe we don't know what we're doing. But you're right, Ed. Like I've worked in a variety of different platforms, industries right now. So previously back, pre-pandemic, we built and raised and sold a niche recruiting platform out of California where, everyone says, Tony, this is crazy. You're never going to do this. We just focused on recruitment of construction in just California, right? And everyone's like, that's not a big enough market to make any sort of dent. But what happened was that's all we did. And we basically turned away business because we said, that's not what we do. Happy to refer you to somebody who'd be a better fit, but this is all we do. And we scaled that business and eventually we got acquired out. And then we used that to kind of start next business. We jumped into, the AI human capital management field a couple of years ago. And I like to say it was before AI was cool, right? Because I'm a visionary, my wife says I'm not, but that's a story for a different day. And yeah, we were able to actually raise funding off of the concept and some of the traction that we had. Ultimately, what I ended up doing was I ended up parting away from that and kind of went back into my first love, which was, recruitment and consulting services. I love doing it because it's just such a roller coaster and you get to meet a lot of different people. And yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing these days.
What it means, Tony, is you've been through different phases, different shifts in the startup landscape as we're navigating right now. What I like is when you talk, you really do talk from, hey, I understand who you are as a founder. You've been there, you've done that. And I think it's important for everybody to understand what Tony was talking about. Let's just unpack it for a pro tip. What Tony did is he went into a niche and established a beachhead, construction in California, dominated that, and then it just snowballed from there. That's pretty good. No, that's not the billion-dollar TAM, but it's a place to start. And I think that's really important for all the founders. You're going to take anything away from Tony's experience is don't be afraid to get in a niche, but understanding that you've got a major TAM. You're going to start off with your SOM and you're going to grow into, and your TAM is unattainable, but it is something that you can aspire to, and that's where success often occurs. Instead of trying to boil the ocean, you're going to say, I'm going to niche down. Tony, what are your thoughts on advising founders on where to start with a beachhead, with a niche?
Yeah, I mean, I always say, look for the opportunity, right? And try to lead with a problem that you're trying to solve, right? I talk to a lot of founders around the community and they genuinely have great ideas. And I think that they're totally, there's a lot of things that can be done with it. But I think the best feedback is, have you really identified this problem and who's suffering the most? And really that does you a couple things, right? It allows you to really kind of micro target your audience and really getting in and asking them questions of the true pain points, and then you can really kind of derive a solution around trying to solve it. I always say I'd rather be something to someone than everyone to no one,
Hmm.
right? And the whole idea is, if like you said, we try to boil the ocean or eat an elephant, right? We're casting too wide of a net with limited resources, and we haven't even really kind of defined out the problem that we're trying to solve. So I'm really saying, it's in the beginning, it's okay to say, I don't know who I'm solving for this yet. And that's where you just constantly are interviewing people, having conversations, and really kind of ranking it and seeing, okay, who is having the biggest challenge here? And then you kind of put that up against, okay, I've identified here are 3, 4 niches that have a problem. Next step is, okay, which one of these are going to actually generate revenue for me, right? Because I think that's the other problem that oftentimes I see in early stage is you can identify a problem within a niche, and that's one thing, and people will tell you your idea is great. But the next step is, okay, are they willing to pay you to solve that problem? Because what I ran up against, I learned this the hard way years ago, is the biggest enemy is status quo, right? And
Hmm.
status quo means is basically, yeah, I have a problem and it's a pain in my butt, but it's not a big enough problem that I'm going to upend and make a change, right? It's not a big enough disruptor. So we really need to look at identifying that and say, yes, this is something that can come to market and we can slowly scale it, because it's easier to scale up than to pull it back.
That's great. Let's jump into some questions. Q has gathered some questions, and what we do is we like to research our guests and then find out from other founders and just the market in general what questions we might ask to make this helpful for all of you watching. With that being said, if you're in the audience right now and you have a question, make sure you use that chat or the Q&A box. The Q&A box is the best place to go. This is going to spark some ideas. Let's get some questions going, and then we'll blast Tony and we'll get all the wisdom. Just we'll squeeze it from him, every single fiber, and try and get some things going. Q, what do we got going? What's the first question?
So our first question today, Ed, is given your experience, what are the top 3 qualities a startup founder should look for in their first hires? And why are these especially important in the early stages?
First hires. Let's break this down into 2 sections, Tony, because I know you got a lot of opinions on it. Let's talk about co-founder and let's talk about hires. And I'd love to hear your opinion. I went on a huge rant yesterday during yesterday's shows about co-founders, but I'd love to hear your take on co-founders first, and then let's get to employees.
Yeah, I don't want to regurgitate too much of, what you mentioned yesterday about co-founders, but I think the number one piece of advice I always give people is that, are you sure that you need a co-founder right away? Because I think that there is this, misconception that when we're chasing funding, that we need to have a co-founder to enable to achieve that. And sometimes that's the case, sometimes it's not, but it's not a one size fit all. And I think particularly when your original founder is non-technical, that there's this real big urge to look for like a CTO type capacity, right? And so, what I always say is that outside of your marriage, your co-founder is probably going to be one of the most important relationships you're ever going to have in your adult life. And so it's something that you really need to take carefully, right? And so thinking about it from that perspective, right? When you date somebody, and then you get engaged, right? It's months, maybe even a couple of years before you decide, okay, I'm going to commit to this person. And yet we jump into bed with co-founders like, it's because they're available, right? It's like, oh, they've got the qualifications. It seems like a good fit. Let's just jump right into bed together, right? I've made that mistake before where I've had some really great co-founders and I've had some where I'm like, I really regretted my choices here. And so, what I always say is find ways to work with co-founders in limited capacities. So that way, you can try it both ways because I think it's really important that your co-founder should enjoy working with you as well. And if it's not a mutually beneficial relationship, he or she's not going to be in like, they're not going to be wanting involved and go all in with you. And so it's just what you don't want to create is a dynamic where you're pulling all the weight and your co-founder's not because they're just not into it because they're not feeling the relationship, but you've already given up equity, you've already pot committed, so you're kind of stuck together, right? So I always say is like, hey, look, try it out in a project basis and say like, hey, I've got certain milestones that we're trying to hit here. Love to bring you on to see how we work together. From there, based on the results there, you can scale into maybe some sort of contract basis, where like, hey, I'll pay you for this next year. And then slowly but surely, once you both feel comfortable, you can move into like an equity type situation where you're both going all in. But I always tell people is don't feel the urge that you have to have a co-founder right away. And B, if you do decide that's the direction you want to go, make sure you just don't rush into it. Get opinions on people, try multiple people out, right? Just don't rush it too much.
I just want to make a note. We are not condoning that you physically jump in bed with your co-founders. If I did that, that's the fastest way to drive co-founders away. But
Yeah.
figuratively speaking, Tony's definitely got the right point. And as always, you can listen to my other clips about this. Cliffs and vesting schedules are an absolute must when you're working with co-founders.
Yeah.
And then when you're together, co-founder agreements, operating agreements, depending on how your company is structured, because that is all going to come up in the due diligence. Don't take it for granted. It all comes up. You got skeletons in the closet when it comes to your co-founders, how it got structured. That is all going to come up. Now let's talk, Tony, about hiring. So let me just set the play for you, okay? You've got maybe a couple co-founders and they're working and then bang, first round of funding comes in or they made enough money and they want to hire employee number one. What is your advice?
Yeah. First piece of advice I tell people, and this sounds counterintuitive to somebody who's in the recruitment industry, but I try to talk them out of it at first. And here's why. So many times when you're at early stage and that first wave of funding comes in, you think, okay, I need to scale up headcount to meet capacity, to meet demand. Challenge you often see is processes and tools aren't often in place to support that kind of growth and scale. So what I always try to advise is like, let's look under the hood of whatever role you're trying to fill and make sure, have you automated via AI, via tools, via processes, all that you can do? And basically you're at the function. It's like, we can't take this any further without bringing somebody else on. That's number one, right? Because again, we think, I've seen it happen time and time again, where we think we're going to bring on an engineer, we're going to bring on a head of sales because we're going to transition from founder-led sales into our first account executive or VP of sales. Problem is, if those processes aren't in place, I mean, you're just going to burn that capital so fast and you will lose the confidence of your investors, right? So I would say that's piece number one. Piece number two is really, you got to make sure as founders, like we wear a lot of hats, especially in the early stages, is get really good at being good at HR, right? So a lot of things that we don't think about in the beginning are, okay, we're hiring up. What do agreements look like? What do policies and handbooks and support looks like? Because now you're exposing yourself to liabilities that maybe before when you're working out of your basement and it didn't matter, who cares? But now you've got people who are working for you. So that opens you up to a lot of like laws and policies and procedures. And those are landmines that people don't realize, right? And so again, you want to immerse yourself in being good at HR. And yeah, there's a lot of great fractional services or people who can take on those functions for you, but you as a founder should make sure that you at least have a good base knowledge, because one thing that always happens is whether it's HR or it's technology or it's sales component, we blindly trust these hires to run this part of the business. I've hired them, I'm going to focus on other things. And then 6 weeks later, you check in and you find out the bottom's dropped out. You're like, well, I just assumed that they were doing it. And so you really have to make sure, as they always say, the old saying is, inspect what you expect, and basically making sure that you're constantly doing check-ins with the idea of you have some level of expertise of what you expected.
That's so important. Let me just pause you right there, because I think what happens, Tony, is people bring on, especially new hires, and they lack that experience in HR, not just HR, but also management. They lack that experience. And what happens is they expect a hire to be just as engaged, just as motivated as you are as a co-founder. And you expect that, and then you don't inspect what you expect because you're expecting them to just act like a co-founder, and all the systems aren't there. And people just get frustrated. They say, man, this is just a big waste of money. And then you feel bad. You don't want to let them go, which brings in the hire slow, fire quick aspect of it. And a lot of that can come down to the co-founder not being able to manage the employee. There's so many factors that come into this place when it comes to just a co-founder getting out of their own head and getting good at HR and getting away from that expectation that everybody's going to act like you. Stay up as long as you do, be just as engaged. An employee is not incentivized the same way that you are as a co-founder.
And I think those are great points. And, two other points I would bring up is, one, there's a big difference I often see between a first-time founder and a second-time founder. And really that comes into expectations and aligning those expectations. And along the lines of what you're talking about, we're thinking, okay, this employee one is going to work 60 hours a week, and they're going to bleed everything in regards to this business. And they might, but they also might say, what, I've got a family and outside interest. I'm going to put in all my work, but I can't be working Friday night at 10 o'clock. Other big thing is making sure that you're aligning what you're offering to what you expect. I often see really, really low pay bands, really, really low equity, grant, with the expectation of this person's going to be killing themselves, right? So you just have to make sure that, you get good advice from people in the industry of what is a, fair compensation package to bring on, those first couple of employees, right? And so we always say, you have that employee pool of your equity shares put aside to make sure that you're attracting top talent. Because the other thing I was going to mention in my second point is, we live in an era, and I see this all the time these days. People need work so bad that during the interview process, they will say and do whatever it takes to get their foot in the door, right? So if they told you they part of the job was turning water into wine, they would say, yep, I've done it, right? So you just really have to do good due diligence and making sure, is this going to be the right fit? And to Q's question that she asked earlier is, right, you can find somebody on paper that would have the core skill sets, right? Whether it's a developer or a salesperson, on paper, they've done this or that. But working in an early stage startup versus working at Google, two completely different beasts. And they're not for everyone. They're different. One's not better than the other. But you have to make sure that somebody does have the right mentality to work in a startup, right? And that is being creative, being nimble, being okay with wearing multiple different hats, all the things that we talk about all the time, around the, startups.com. So doing a better job of making sure that those intrinsic soft skills are going to align up with the mission of what you're trying to do.
I think I saw a question coming in the chat, Jen, that pertains exactly to what we're talking about, if I'm not mistaken. What do we got, Jen?
Yes, we have a question from Brad. He says, what are your thoughts between hiring an FTE, which takes a long-term large salary commitment and requires complexities like benefits and payroll taxes, versus hiring from contracting shops or sites like TopTal?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm just laying it up for you because you've been involved in placing contractors and full-time employees. So I'm sure you're having this conversation with startups, founders, managers, executives all the time.
Yeah.
Go
my
for
favorite
it.
conversation. It's my favorite conversation to have these days, right? So again, one is not right, one is not wrong, right? But I am a huge advocate, not necessarily for FTE versus contractor. What I'm a huge advocate for is a global workforce, right? So ever since the pandemic and the whole push for work from home, I think what's happened is people realize a lot of the talent that is out there in the global market. So I primarily work with talent in Latin America, Brazil, Costa Rica, Mexico. And what I always say is they're the best bang for your buck. Does it mean it's the right fit for every company? No. But there are things to consider that when your runway is precious and your capital is limited, when you hire on an FTE, Brad, I think, hit the nail on the head. The hidden costs that we don't think about, payroll taxes, benefits, time off, right? that can add an additional 20% on to that base salary that people don't think about. My business Handle, it works in the same capacity like a Top Tall or a Bears Dev does. And what we do is we actually match up talent from Latin America to kind of scale into early stage businesses. And I've got people who work out of Brazil who've been in the same company for 4+ years, and they're a core part of that team. They're just not based in, San Francisco or LA, and they're going to go to your office and use your air hockey table that you promised that, that you put in your job description and saying like, hey, we got air hockey and snacks, come work for me, that people don't ever use, right? So the companies I say that are winning are the ones that realize that a global workforce just unlocks more talent potential than they ever had before.
Go global. I totally agree with that because you can find so many great deals. Let's break this down for all the different types, and you can jump in, Tony, if you got some thoughts on this. But there are so many different combinations of types of employees, types of contractors, and some contractors work like employees and some employees work like contractors. I haven't been employed in a meaningful way with the traditional taxes and the insurance and all that stuff for a very, very long time. But I will act like a full-time employee, like a contractor. You might find someone like that. Now, if you're looking for short-term technical expertise, contractors are great. But eventually, you keep using contractors, it's not going to work out if they have their own business. You have their overhead, their profitability that they look at. But then if you hire a contractor who, say, is just a freelancer and they're looking for other work at the same time, you might not get all their best, and you want them to be a full-time employee. Now, some contractors become full-time employees. But then there are employees that are in a spot where they can be a contractor. They don't need all the health insurance. They don't need all the benefits. They'll work and they'll be dedicated to you until you can take them full time. But as always, if you've got the runway, you've got the systems, you know what you need them to do. You understand the org chart and you understand how to generate revenue. If you're paying $1 to an employee, how you get $3 out of that, how you get $5. Like if you look at the revenue per employee from Netflix compared to Disney, it is astronomical. Just go look it up. I'm not going to quote it because I'm going to get flamed for not knowing my numbers, but the disparity between how much revenue someone in Google and Netflix generates per employee compared to Disney is unbelievable. You have to have those systems in place. What do you think, Tony?
Yeah, so you just kind of put a lot out there, to kind of unpack it a little bit, right? I think it depends on what your need is. I think that, the Upworks of the world can be very, very advantageous if you just need a short-term project to get done because you're trying to hit a milestone or a deliverable. I think long-term contractors, that's more of a classification, and basically it's more of a mentality and a cultural, thing, if more than anything else, right? Calling somebody a contractor versus full-time employee, really it's a matter of paperwork, right? Where there's some legalities involved in the country of origin where they just legally can't be called an employee. But like I said earlier, I've got some contractors who have been in the core team for 4 years plus, right? They're treated like the core team. So so it's all in how you as the founder choose to project onto them, right? If you choose to treat them like a contractor and keep them at an arm's length, then that's how they're going to act. If you choose to bring them in as a part of the core team and they're part of your stand-ups and your celebrations and your wins, and you're soliciting feedback from them just as much as you would from somebody down the street, then I promise you, they are going to go to war for you and make sure that they deliver everything that they possibly can. So it really starts with us as founders to make sure is like, how are we going to treat this talent? Because they're a human being first, regardless of how you classify them. So I have some contractors, they have equity stakes in businesses. They do. And so they put in the reps every day because they believe in what they're building. And I have some other that they're more of an augmentation idea where they layer onto the core team and they work on certain projects while other members work on new features. So it's just a variety and a mixture of things, right? But one of the big things, and I want early stage founders to realize this, is that buzzword is still AI. Not a day goes by where I don't meet a new founder who's building something around AI. You probably should be, right? But there's only so many machine learning engineers in the world right now, right? It's still relatively new and the talent is thin. And what's happening is the Metas and the Googles and, of the world, they're paying huge salaries to these US based engineers just to keep them on staff. Half of them don't even have anything to do, but they would rather pay them to keep them on staff than let them go to the competitor. So you think about that. These guys are getting paid $250 to $350,000 a year. Now you're an early stage startup. Maybe you got the first round of funding. That's great. But now you're going to try to compete with half of that and say, I'll give you half of what you're making now to go from the security of, working at Amazon to come working for my startup, and we'll give you equity. It's not always the most attractive, right? So again, unlocking your talent pool and saying there are thousands of machine learning engineers in Latin America who have doctorates in this sort of stuff, speak English, and are going to be able to deliver just as much as if somebody US takes up. That is the secret to really moving your startup forward at a nice clip, is just, again, realizing you don't have to have talent in US in order to move it forward.
With that topic down, that question answered. Thanks, Brad, for sending in that question. That's very helpful for our discussion. Q, what's another question we could answer?
So let's continue on with conversations around talent here. So Tony's emphasized the importance of avoiding companies that treat talent poorly. And I want to know, why is it crucial for startups to maintain integrity in their recruitment process, and what long-term effects can poor practices have on a company's success?
All you, Tony.
So I actually was, posting about this on LinkedIn today. I recently fired a client that was an early stage startup due to they didn't have their act together in the hiring process. What people don't realize is that one way that you can damage your brand is the way that you have your hiring practices and the way that you treat your talent, right? People are more social than ever, and they voice their opinions online more than ever. There's more efficacy boards, and there's more ways, and we're not just talking Glassdoor anymore, right? So there's more and more ways for people to understand what a culture and a business is really like. And so it can be a quick way to assassinate your brand and limiting yourself to good talent by not having your act together. And candidates are savvy, right? They will look at it and say, if the hiring process is like this and you're not keeping your promises and feedback loops are really, really latent, and you're offering me below the pay band that we discussed, what's it going to be like to work for you, right? And so the more selective candidates are going to move on, right? So I always say, and this seems cliche, is always act as if nobody's looking, right? And basically it's super simple. If you say that you're going to do something, if you say that you're going to do something and you can't do it, be transparent with them, right? And just let them know, hey, we've fallen behind in our interviews, or we're going to sync up next week. We appreciate your patience. We promise we'll get back to you by Wednesday. Candidates, talent, everyone are reasonable people. If you treat them with the respect that they deserve, they're going to treat it back. But if you just go radio silent, that is a quick way to lose talent out the door. And I'm seeing, again, we saw the era of quiet quitting a couple of years ago, right? It's still out there. It's just not as loud. And I know a lot of people who have just decided, you know what, I would rather be unemployed and go found my own startup and see what happens than work in an environment that's going to be detrimental to my well-being.
I think you're nailing a few things just in terms of integrity. That word came up as far as integrity is concerned. It's the same thing that I like to say to investors. I let them know, listen, your process, sorry for all you Americans out there, it's process, but us Canadians say process. Your process is your product. If you're out there and you want to invest in founders and startups, high caliber pedigree startups, and you treat them like dirt through the entire thing, you are not going to get referrals. You are not going to get access to a wider selection, and you're going to get a black mark. There's reputation, and there are literally sites that you can go to where people will talk about this investor, that investor, reputation goes, and a lot of them are internal, and we provide notes all the time. Stay away from this investor. This investor acts like a jerk, and this is the best investor. They are very efficient. We like these investors. The same is going to go when you're hiring. That word spreads, and I have never looked beyond Glassdoor, but I know stuff happens on TikTok, stuff happens on Reddit. Not a day goes by where you're not seeing some story where a CEO totally flubs some announcement, treats their employees like a jerk, and then bang, it gets out on the news, it gets out on social media, and then you're cooked. And that's the last place that you want to go, and then you're diminishing your chances.
I think the number one tool in a founder's repertoire is transparency, right? Nobody expects perfection, and people expect you to make mistakes along the way. I think it's in how you own them and learn from them that are going to be the path forward, right? And so I always encourage candidates going through an interview process is, grill them back, interview them back. Is this a backfill position? Is this a growth position? If I'm replacing somebody, what happened to them? What are the challenges that you're seeing as a founder? What would you do differently? And don't hide it, right? Again, you don't have to give them the gory details, but I think creating a level of transparency gives top talent the ability to see behind the curtain and say, yes, I want to be a part of this journey with you, because again, the more buy-in that you get from the talent, the better off they're going to be from you. But you can't expect them to buy in unless you're giving them something to buy in the first place.
100%. Let's jump to our hot take, hot topic. Always enjoy batting these around with you there, Tony. Q's been great about bringing things that we might want to talk about. Just a note for those of you who are in our audience, I saw some new people joining. If you've got a question, feel free, put it in the Q&A box or put it in the chat. We'll make sure that we answer them before we end at the top of the hour. But Q, what's our topic of the day? What are we going to explore?
Our topic of the day today is how tech stars Meta helped profitable LATAM startup Mercatelli raise a $2.6 million seed. So this article is primarily about how Mercatelli, a startup from Latin America, co-founded by Henry Mache, raised $2.6 million in seed funding to enhance its platform, and it allows businesses to manage e-commerce basically directly through WhatsApp. The platform basically simplifies sales, payments, and inventory for business by integrating those specific functions into the messaging app. And it's hugely popular in the region. What do you guys think?
Let me couch this conversation here. I think for all the founders going to be watching, because we have a lot of founders that come to us and they want to raise money, seed, pre-seed. This is a sign of the times, everybody. First of all, I personally experienced this when working with a startup here locally, and he was trying to do like sort of the fulfilled by Amazon for specialty foods and all that good stuff. And I asked him how his order comes in. And he said, Ed, even though I've got a physical store, 80% of my orders come through, guess what? Come through Messenger, come through Facebook, come through Instagram, come through these platforms like WhatsApp. And I know people are crazy about WhatsApp all around the world, not necessarily here in North America. So it shows you the emerging market. So what they did is they were able to use a current technology and leverage off of that and see a gap in the technology and the gap of what's happening in the marketplace. But I want all the founders who are watching this, will be watching this, to look very closely, and we're going to include links to this article so you can see for yourself. This company launched in 2022. Let's just take this in context. 2 years ago, now has 1,000 companies over 20 different countries and has surpassed $1.5 million in revenue. Think about this for a moment. $1.5 million in revenue, and they are profitable. Profit. The P to the R to the O to the F to the I to the T, profitable. And they just raised a seed round after they showed growth of 3.5 times per year. Now, if you think, if you're doubling per year, that is amazing. But they're going 3.5 times per year, and they raised a $2.6 million round. Just in case you missed this, they had $1.5 million in revenue. They were profitable, growing 3.5 times a year, thousands of companies, 20 different countries, and they only raised $2.6 million. Now, to nail it in the coffin even further, I have founders, and I hope some of you are listening to this, who are been trying to raise a $4 million pre-seed round or $2 million pre-seed round with no revenue, no product. This is a sign of times. Right now, the market is struggling, and these premium startups, pedigree startups, are the ones that are going to raise the investment dollars. So if you're wondering, can I raise? What chance do I get? You want to be looking at what the funding deals are happening in the news. Not to say you can't raise money from a friendly angel or family, anything like that. And these funding rounds happen. I'm watching checks for hundreds of thousands of dollars get written pre-seed, pre-product, pre-revenue. But if you want to play with the big boys, you want to play with these VCs, and you want to build a unicorn, this is the type of traction that's required. Tony, what are your thoughts? We advise founders all the time. Like you're going to meet a whole bunch of founders in 15 minutes and start talking about the same thing. What are your thoughts on this story?
Yeah. So when I read this story, a couple of days ago, first off, I was not surprised, right? So I text and use WhatsApp more these days than I probably do just like my standard text messaging. And that's because I'm meeting my audience where they're at, right? So anyone I interact with down in Latin America, they're all on WhatsApp, right? And so it's a pretty smart move when you start looking and embracing what global technology looks like, and you want to meet your audience where they're at, right? If that's the tool that they're using, then that's the TAM, right? That's the opportunity. If you can identify the opportunity within that potential pool, then it just becomes that much more obvious that you have something to build on. I think there's a big difference of why they've succeeded and are profitable versus if they weren't. They wouldn't have the same traction if they were like built in San Francisco, right? Because it's the same technology type, right? But the cost of location is what makes all the difference, right? They're able to build it a lot cheaper because the dollar just goes a lot farther down there, and they can do a lot more with a lot less. So if you're a startup founder, and I don't care if you're in San Francisco or Calgary or New York or Wisconsin, right? Again, to our earlier conversation, when you start thinking globally and not about where are my people located, but how do I get the best bang for my buck at every point in my journey, that just becomes a big game changer, right? Because now I'm able to stretch capital. I'm able to add that with being crafty and being nimble, and I can get a lot more done for a lot less. To your point earlier about deciding what sort of amount to raise, I always tell people is just raise what you absolutely need, right? Because I think the negativity comes in is, well, when I acquire funding, all my woes are going to be solved. Well, take it from me. It just opens up a whole new set of complex problems. And now you just have people to answer for. So start with a really, really modest raise of like, we needed to get this milestone, get some new traction, new proof points, and now we're moving to the next point, right? Globalization, and just take what you need.
Now, this company's got an uphill road. We just talked about it. They want to hire AI engineers so they can create AI chatbots. This is the future. If you're not building something using AI, at least putting a wrapper or accessing the APIs or the tools, the kits with these LLMs, then it's going to be super tough. Everybody can do it. Let's take a poll here, all right? Audience, you can participate if you want. I'm going to ask Q and Jen. What is the number one messaging app that you use? Q, what's the number one messaging app?
I would say probably WhatsApp.
Use WhatsApp?
I do, yeah.
What are the other messaging apps that you use, and break them down? Jen, giving you the preview so you can break down yours, because I use Slack for work. I use iMessage mostly for family and for friends. I use Telegram maybe 10% of the time, LinkedIn Messenger, and some people have me on Signal. Q, what's your breakdown?
I would say iMessage. Obviously, I'm on the Ed Squad, so Slack as well, largely WhatsApp as well, and that's mostly for friends who either don't have iMessage or they're out of town or like live across the world.
Got it. All right, Jen, what's your breakdown?
For myself, it would be iMessage as number one, Slack for work, and I actually use Facebook Messenger as the other one. I used to use WhatsApp, and I stopped using it just because I thought it was too many messaging systems. And if I have someone on Facebook, I just use the Messenger on there.
Okay, we got a new entry, Facebook Messenger. Who uses Facebook now? I completely delete Facebook, but I completely understand. Now, here's the other thing. I also use WeChat because of all my contacts in China. Everybody uses WeChat. Now, I'm using this as an example for all the founders out there that go, oh, this is a really great idea. I'm just going to go put something on WhatsApp now. The market is fragmented here in North America. And I'm piggybacking off of Tony's point in terms of what it's like to be in another country. I could build an app within WhatsApp in China and immediately get so much traction. Like, it's absolutely insane how WhatsApp works and how we got that going because of the network effects and how dense and how connected and the domination of WhatsApp. Here in North America, you've got all these companies competing for the same thing. So it's so fragmented. So you're going to have to figure out other ways to break into the marketplace. And that's where people go omni-channel, or building your own app can sometimes make sense if you can get that adoption. But there's such a difference. And that's what I mean. Like, we can hear these stories and say, this might work in Brazil, this might work in Latin America, but it's not going to work here. And that's the reason you need to do that idea validation, that customer discovery, and actually go and talk to your market. Tony, I know you got opinions on this.
Well, it comes down to founder credibility, right? Where if I say I'm going to build something that's going to like work in the WhatsApp ecosystem, the first question is, okay, what do you know about LATAM that's going to allow you to do that? Because if I say I'm going to build something for WhatsApp that's going to be for the US and Canada, right there, my credibility goes out the window because it's just not widely used. Versus like, if I'm LATAM based and we know that like, hey, my culture, we use this all the time. It's a way of life. They automatically have more credibility than I do, right? So that's then where I'm strategically going to probably go look for a co-founder down in LATAM to basically fill in that kind of domain expertise to kind of have that strength, right? I think that knowing your market and where you come from and who you're serving is really vastly underrated, because I think a big challenge is if they don't find you credible, they're not going to buy from you, and they're not certainly not going to invest in you.
How would you build credibility? Like if you needed to go and break into a market, or what are the things that you would do?
Put in the reps. That's what I did. Like, I mean, when I started doing this 4 years ago, I didn't have any contacts in Latin America, but I put in the reps. I started talking to people down there, started interviewing anybody and everybody I could, got one placement, just one. And it took me forever to do it, right? But what happened was I got them in, treated them really well as an employee, right? When it came time to fill my second role, what did I do? I went to that employee and said, like, yo, you got somebody for me? Yeah, let me tell my friends, they would love to work for you. It just started snowballing from there and just created this kind of effect, this network effects that you're always talking about, where all of a sudden I would post on LinkedIn about, hey, I need somebody. I've got people that are basically signaling for me, hey, come talk to Tony. He's got these opportunities. And it's just organically grown. But you have to put in the reps and be authentic, right? Kind of going back to our original conversation is, if I say I'm going to do it, and I'm not perfect, I feel bad when I don't always follow up with somebody just because like my bandwidth gets blown up. And so, but I own it and I'm apologetic about it, and like, it won't happen again. And people get that. But again, it's just, you put in the reps, you're authentic and you're genuine, and you take care of people. And that's how I was able to get credibility down there, where now if I just say I need somebody, I just say, like, who do you know? I got people coming to me, and it's a great place to be.
Q, you looked into this story and you're doing some
I did.
research. What's the buzz? Like, what are people saying about it? Because it really is. And I think it fits nicely with what Tony's been talking about. What other factors are we not looking at or we should pay attention to in this story?
I think that most of the factors you guys are paying attention to. I think one of the most important points between yourself, Ed, and Tony is, just how important that validation process is, because in the validation process, you can also have a good gauge of who are the best investors for me to pitch to. Who should I get in contact with to be part of an accelerator, or which accelerator, where should I be a part of it? The mention that most of the investors for Mercatelli are actually South Asian men. People in India use WhatsApp more than they do in North America. So they know and they see the importance and the potential of something like Mercatelli. So I think that's a great point. I think we're touching on all of the most important parts.
If I were to try to go get investment right now from a round of angels to say, we want to build something on for WhatsApp, and they're based in San Diego, 99% of them are not going to see the value or the need for it. So I'm just wasting my time and spinning my wheels, versus go to Southeast Asia and talk to people where it's a part of their culture and their society. They'll get it a lot faster, right? And so I think sometimes one of the mistakes we make when we're trying to raise funding is we don't target the right investors. We think we want to target anyone and everyone. And yes, volume is key. And I can tell you some stories about like the blood, sweat, and tears that we did to raise. But we learned it was a lot better to be more targeted and finding investors that they saw the value, because the mission resonated with them.
Matching with investors, so important. Pro tip for anybody watching this: if you are building something in the same space, adjacent to it, in the same market, what you do is you go look up those partners, those general partners or the associates or the analysts inside those companies that invested, and you contact them. You can find their information. Say, hey, I saw that you invested in Mercatelli. We got something that we think will complement your portfolio. What do you think? And then that's how you research and you get to know the market. Just a pro tip. Tony, appreciate you spending the time here. We're going to give you just a couple minutes to wrap things up. Any last words? You are a community leader, one of our advisors here at Startups.com. So founders have the privilege, and you're so generous with your time. They spend time with you, and you give office hours, and you do workshops for them. What would you like to say, and how would you like to invite them to interact with you?
Yeah. I mean, first off, like the last year in the startups community has been a blast. I've told you before, like sometimes it's like the favorite part of my day. I love just talking shop with founders, and not just on team building and HR strategies, but just, all the components that go into building a startup from early stage, because, I learned some good lessons along the way, and I'm happy to share them. So don't hesitate to reach me on Slack. I have office hours that you can find on the Startups.com portal. Follow me on LinkedIn. I really do try to share as much usable tactical advice on hiring in general and what to look for in early stage. And then feel free, shameless plug, my website is www.buildwithhandle.com. So if anybody has questions on, hey, not sure where to go with my next hire or if I've got the right team in place, love to have a conversation with you. If you've ever wanted to explore Latin America talent, I also do talent out of Eastern Europe as well. Let's have a conversation, and we'd love to help you, make your startup a reality.
We will continue to shamelessly plug you, Tony. It's my pleasure to do so by including all of your information in the description of this video if everyone's going to watch this broadcast later on the recording. That's it for us today. Remember, Startups.com, we're your online on-demand accelerator. We're a bunch of founders accelerating other founders. Feel free to join us. If you check out our website, Startups.com, it's plastered all over the place. You can see what we've got going on. You can check our discussion boards. You can check out our courses. There's so much going on. And then hopefully you join us for some workshops where we can be your advisors, invite you to Startups.com no matter what stage you are, what you're building. Once again, Tony, appreciate it. Q, Jen, always a pleasure. Thanks for making this happen. Thanks, everyone. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, we are here all those days. See you next time.